Imagine this one arrogant cop thought he was untouchable, betting his badge against the dignity of a stranger. He spat on a man in broad daylight, laughing like he'd already won the jackpot. But what he didn't know, that stranger was about to flip the odds against him, because he was the new police chief. And when the tables turned, Rick learned the hard way, you don't gamble with respect. Hey, watch where you're going. The voice was sharp, slicing through the heavy summer air like a blade. People on the sidewalk turned their heads instantly. It was Officer Rick Daniels, broad-shouldered, red-faced, and known around Brookville as a cop with a short fuse. Some whispered he carried his badge like a weapon, more interested in throwing his weight around than protecting anyone. Rick was leaning against his patrol car, sunglasses on, his hand resting lazily near his belt. He looked more like a man waiting to pick a fight than one serving the community. At that exact moment, a black man in a tailored suit crossed the street. He carried a sleek black briefcase in one hand and adjusted his tie with the other. His posture was calm, almost regal, the kind of presence that made people turn and look twice. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't causing trouble, he was simply walking with confidence. As he passed, he gave Rick a polite nod. Nothing flashy, just respect. But to Rick, that simple gesture felt like arrogance. Who do you think you are? Walking around like you own the place? Rick barked, pushing himself off the car. His tone carried not just anger but something darker, an old prejudice that had always simmered beneath the surface. The man stopped, raising his eyebrows slightly, but his voice was steady. I don't want any trouble, officer. I'm on my way to a meeting. That calmness only fueled Rick's irritation. To him, respect wasn't enough. He wanted fear. He wanted submission. Don't get smart with me, Rick growled, stepping closer. The tension was thick now, drawing in the attention of people nearby. A couple walking past slowed down, sensing trouble. A street vendor leaned forward from his cart of pretzels. Even a teenager across the street pulled out his phone, hitting record. And then Rick snapped, without hesitation, without a second thought. He spat. The thick drop of spit landed on the man's polished black shoes, sliding across the leather and dripping onto the pavement. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A woman covered her mouth in shock. Someone whispered, "Did he really just do that?" The man looked down at his shoe slowly, then back up at Rick. His face was unreadable, no shouting, no anger, no raised fists, just a steady, almost chilling calmness. He didn't wipe the spit away. He didn't bend down. He simply stood tall, staring straight into Rick's eyes. "You'll regret that," he said softly. His voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud. It was a statement of fact, spoken with absolute certainty. Rick burst out laughing, the kind of cruel laugh that made people's skin crawl. "Regret? Don't make me laugh. You're lucky I don't haul you in for loitering." The crowd didn't laugh with him. Phones were out now, recording every second. People shook their heads, disgusted. They knew this wasn't just about spit. It was about power, about disrespect, about a man in uniform abusing the authority he thought made him untouchable. But Rick didn't see the danger. He didn't see the phones. He didn't see the crowd's outrage. He only saw a man he believed he had humiliated. "Now, get out of here before I change my mind." Rick snapped. The black man tilted his head slightly, almost as if he were studying. "Rick," then, with that same eerie calmness, he replied, "You don't know who I am. But you will." He picked up his briefcase, adjusted his jacket, and walked away, not hurried, not shaken, just composed. The crowd parted for him, some nodding in silent respect. A woman muttered under her breath, "That officer's done for. He doesn't even know who he messed with." Rick leaned back against his car, chuckling, but deep down there was a flicker of unease. Something about the way the man had spoken, so controlled, so sure of himself it didn't feel like an empty warning. Still, Rick shook it off. "People like him don't scare me," he thought. "I've been on these streets too long to worry about some guy in a suit." What Rick didn't realize was that his entire world was about to change. That single act of arrogance, spitting on a stranger, was going to echo through his career, his reputation, and his life in ways he could never have imagined. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering to one another. The videos, however, didn't disappear. They were already being uploaded, shared, and passed around. By the time Rick finished his shift that night, hundreds of people had seen what he'd done. And the man with the briefcase? He was far more than he appeared. Rick had spat on dignity itself, on leadership, on justice. And tomorrow, when the truth came out, Brookville would witness a reckoning unlike anything it had seen before, because that stranger wasn't just a man heading to a meeting. He was the city's new police chief, and Officer Rick Daniels had just declared war on his own future. Later that evening, the Brookville Police Department felt different. The air was electric, charged with rumors that spread faster than wildfire. Whispers echoed through every hallway, bouncing between cubicles and locker rooms. They're saying he's from out of town. No, he grew up here but left. For a bigger city job? I heard he's all about reform, gonna clean this place up. Nobody knew for sure, but one thing was certain. The city council had appointed a brand new police chief, and people were nervous. Brookville's department had been under fire for years. Complaints of misconduct, abuse of power, and corruption were piling up. The council finally promised change, and change was coming. Inside the break room, Officer Rick Daniels leaned back. In his chair, boots kicked up on the table, laughing with his buddies. A can of soda hissed as he cracked it open, his confidence filling the room just as much as his voice. "You should have seen his face," Rick said between bursts of laughter. That guy looked like he wanted to fight but didn't dare. Just, stood there like a statue. Two younger officers chuckled awkwardly, not wanting to seem disloyal but clearly uneasy. Across the room, Sergeant Miller, a seasoned cop with streaks of gray in his hair, narrowed his eyes. He wasn't laughing. "You better be careful, Rick," Miller said flatly. "People are recording everything these days. One video like that, and you're finished." "Doesn't matter how many years you've been here," Rick smirked, waving him off. "Relax, Sarge. I've been here a decade. I know this place inside and out. Nobody's touching me. Whoever this new chief is, he'll have to respect me. I run these streets." The words hung heavy in the air. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. A rookie whispered under his breath, "You don't run anything, Rick. The city does." But he didn't dare say it loud enough for Rick to hear. Rick leaned forward, eyes gleaming with arrogance. "You all think some shiny new chief is gonna come in here and change the game? Please. They all start out tough, and then they realize real quick they need guys like me. Guys who keep order." Sergeant Miller crossed his arms. "Or guys who abuse it." The room went quiet. For a moment, Rick's smile faltered. He glared at Miller. But the older officer didn't blink. Miller had seen men like Rick before, cops who thought the badge made them kings. And he knew one truth Rick had yet to learn. Kings fall. Rick finally broke the silence with a scoff. "Say what you want. I've got seniority. My record's clean enough. They need me." But outside that break room, the department was shifting. Officers whispered in low voices about accountability, reforms, and stricter rules. Some were hopeful. Some were terrified. And a few, like Rick, lived in denial. One officer leaned against the vending machine and muttered to another, "They're saying the new chief is all about fairness. No favoritism, no cover-ups. If that's true, half the guys in this department are in trouble." Another replied quietly, "Maybe it's about time." Meanwhile, Rick strutted through the halls as if nothing could touch him. He slapped backs, cracked jokes, and bragged about his untouchable reputation. But behind him, whispers followed like shadows. "Did you hear what he did today? Spat on some guy in the street. There's video of it. If the new chief sees that, he's done." Rick ignored it all. In his mind, the new chief was just another bureaucrat, a politician in a uniform. Someone who would talk about reform but eventually bow down to the real cops who patrolled the streets. He had no idea how wrong he was. That night, as the sun set over Brookville, Rick drove home in his cruiser, blasting the radio and whistling. He replayed the scene from earlier in his head, amused at the memory of the man's calm, steady words. "You'll regret that." Rick laughed to himself. "Regret? Yeah, right. People regret messing with me, not the other way around." But Even as he spoke, there was a flicker of unease in his chest, something he buried quickly. Back at the station, in the chief's office, a nameplate was being polished and set carefully on the desk. Chief Marcus Johnson, the very same man Rick had spat on Dot, and within hours, Rick Daniel's entire world would flip upside down. The next morning, the Brookville Police Department auditorium was packed. Rows upon rows of officers filled the seats, their crisp blue uniforms pressed and polished, badges gleaming under the bright lights. The air buzzed with anticipation, excitement. For some, dread for others. Everyone knew this day marked a turning point. Rick Daniels stood proudly in the front row. He had polished his shoes, straightened his uniform, and even practiced his confident smirk in the mirror. To him, this was just another dog and pony show. Some new hotshot with big ideas, he thought smugly. They'll talk tough then. Learn real quick who actually runs things around here. The chatter in the auditorium died down as the mayor approached the podium. Clearing his throat, he adjusted his tie and looked out over the sea of officers. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor began, his voice echoing through the hall. Today marks the beginning of a new era for Brookville. For too long, complaints have tarnished this department's name. But now, change is here. We welcome a leader who believes in fairness, respect, and accountability. Please join me in welcoming your new police chief, Mr. Marcus Johnson. The room erupted in gasps. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Officers leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. Some faces lit up with hope, others tightened with unease. But all eyes turned toward the doors at the back of the auditorium, and there he was, walking with steady, unshaken confidence. Marcus Johnson entered the room. He carried the same sleek briefcase, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with deliberate rhythm. His posture was straight, his expression calm yet commanding. Every step seemed to echo louder than the last. Rick's jaw nearly hit the floor. His smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a pale, stunned expression. His stomach twisted as recognition hit him like a punch. It's him. The very man he had mocked, humiliated, and spat on less than 24 hours ago was now the most powerful man in the department. Rick's throat went dry. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, dampening his collar. He wanted to look away, but Marcus's eyes were already on him, steady, piercing, unblinking. The room grew silent as Marcus reached the podium. He set down his briefcase, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the crowd slowly, deliberately. He didn't need to shout for attention. His presence alone demanded it. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that filled every corner of the hall. Respect, Marcus began, pausing for emphasis, is not optional. It is the foundation of law enforcement. Without it, we are not protectors, we are oppressors, and as of today, things will change? A wave of murmurs swept the room again, but quickly died under his gaze. Officers shifted in their seats, some nodding in agreement, others avoiding eye contact. Marcus continued, his tone steady but powerful. This badge is not a shield for arrogance. It is not a license to intimidate. It is a responsibility to serve, to protect, and to treat every member of our community with dignity. That responsibility begins here, in this room, with each of you. Rick's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the eyes of his fellow officers darting toward him. They all remembered the incident yesterday. Some had even seen the video already circulating online. The humiliation of being silently singled out burned hotter than any punishment could. Marcus's gaze lingered on Rick for a long, uncomfortable moment. He didn't say his name. He didn't have to. Everyone in the auditorium knew. Finally, Marcus straightened his shoulders and added, I expect the highest standard from this department. Those unwilling to meet it will not remain here. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared move, no one dared speak. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Rick swallowed hard, his throat tight. The room that once felt like his kingdom now felt like a courtroom, and he was the guilty man on trial. His confidence was gone. The smirk he wore so proudly earlier had dissolved into beads of sweat sliding down his temples. As the ceremony ended, Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, louder, almost defiant. Many officers rose to their feet, clapping for the new chief who had already shaken the ground beneath them. Rick didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands trembled at his sides, his face frozen in disbelief. For the first time in his career, Officer Rick Daniels realized he wasn't untouchable. The man he had disrespected now held his future in his hands, and worse, Marcus Johnson wasn't just a new boss. He was a man who remembered. After the ceremony, while the rest of the department filed out of the auditorium buzzing with speculation, Chief Marcus Johnson's calm voice cut through the noise. "Officer Daniels, my office now." Every head turned. Some officers looked surprised, others exchanged knowing glances. Rick's stomach dropped. His legs suddenly felt heavy, but he forced himself to walk toward the chief's office, trying to mask the panic rising in his chest. The office was large but simple, an oak desk, neatly stacked files, a single framed photo of a family on the shelf. The blinds were half drawn, sunlight casting long stripes across the floor. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, each second pounding in Rick's ears like a drum. Marcus sat behind the desk, hands folded, his face unreadable. He didn't motion for Rick to sit. He didn't have to. The silence itself was a command. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Do you know why I didn't react yesterday?" Rick shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. "Listen, sir, Marcus raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "I didn't react because leaders don't lower themselves to hatred. I don't spit back, I don't curse back. That's not leadership. But what you did wasn't just disrespectful to me, Daniels. It was disrespectful to the badge you wear, and the uniform we all represent." The words hit Rick harder than a fist. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but found no words. His arrogance, the smirk, the swagger was gone. For the first time in years, he felt small. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Rick. "There were witnesses. There are videos. You spat on a man because of his skin color. You humiliated not only me, but this department. And now that man you spat on happens to be your chief." Rick's throat tightened, his voice cracked. "Please, it was a mistake. I didn't know." "If I had known," Marcus slammed his hand lightly on the desk, not in anger, but to make his point crystal clear. "That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. Respect shouldn't depend on a title or a badge. It should be given to every human being you meet. And yet, you thought you were untouchable." Rick lowered his eyes, shame flooding over him. The same man who had strutted around bragging hours ago now stood like a boy caught in the act. Stripped of his power, Marcus's voice softened, but the firmness remained. "Do you know how many people in this community don't trust us because of officers like you? Do you know how many mothers tell their children to be afraid of the police? Every time you abuse that badge, you confirm their fears." Rick swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. "Chief, if you'll just give me one more chance, I'll prove myself, I'll change." Marcus studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally he spoke. "Change doesn't happen because you're caught. Change happens because you choose it before it's demanded. You've had years to treat people with respect. You chose arrogance instead." The silence stretched on, broken only by the relentless ticking of the clock. Rick felt it counting down the seconds of his career. Finally, Marcus stood, his presence towering over the smaller man. "As of this moment, you are suspended pending a full investigation. The department will review the footage, the witness statements, and your record. Justice will decide your fate." Rick's mouth opened in shock. Suspended? Just like that? The weight of reality crashed over him, his paycheck, his reputation, his so-called power vanishing in an instant. "But Chief," he stammered. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You can leave now, Officer Daniels. And remember this, your badge doesn't make you untouchable, your character does." Rick stood frozen for a moment, then slowly turned and walked out of the office. The hallway felt longer than ever, each step echoing with shame. Officers nearby pretended to shuffle papers or sip coffee, but their eyes followed him. They knew what had just happened. By the next morning, the news was everywhere. The video of Rick spitting on Marcus had gone viral. Local papers splashed the headline, "New Police Chief Humiliated Racist Officer Suspended." Community members who had long demanded accountability celebrated in the streets. And when the same crowd that had witnessed the act on the street heard of his suspension, they cheered. To them, it wasn't just punishment, it was justice. For once, the system had listened. Rick sat alone in his apartment that night, staring at his badge on the table. The symbol he once thought gave him power now looked like a weight dragging him down. For the first time, he wondered if he had lost everything. Not because of one mistake, but because of years of choices that finally caught up to him. Meanwhile, Chief Marcus Johnson walked through the precinct halls, his presence commanding respect not through fear, but through integrity. Officers straightened their backs when he passed. Change was no longer just a rumor, it had arrived. And Rick Daniels? He had become the living reminder of what happens when arrogance collides with accountability. Weeks passed, and Brookville began to feel like a different city. Where once tension simmered between the community and the police, now there was a cautious but growing sense of hope. Under Chief Marcus Johnson's leadership, the police department was no longer just a place of authority, it was becoming a place of service. New policies were rolled out almost immediately. Marcus introduced strict rules on accountability. Every officer was required to wear a body camera, and any attempt to tamper with footage led to immediate suspension. Complaints from the community were no longer shoved into filing cabinets to collect dust. They were investigated thoroughly and transparently for the first time in years. Residents felt their voices mattered. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew respect had to be taught, reinforced, and lived every single day. Officers went through weeks of training in community relations, fairness, and de-escalation tactics. Workshops were held where officers sat face-to-face with community members, listening to their fears, their frustrations, and their hopes. It wasn't easy. Some officers resisted, rolling their eyes at the changes. Others quit, unwilling to adapt to the new standard, but slowly, steadily a shift began. The old culture of arrogance, the one that had made officers like Rick Daniels feel untouchable, started to fade. In its place grew professionalism, humility, and integrity. Chief Johnson led by example. He didn't sit behind a desk all day. He walked the streets, shook hands with shopkeepers, greeted children at school crossings, and listened when people approached him with concerns. His presence reminded both the community and his officers that leadership wasn't about power. It was about trust. And as for Rick, his story came to an end far more quietly than it had begun. After weeks of investigation with overwhelming evidence from witnesses and viral videos, the department dismissed him permanently. No badge, no uniform, no authority. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is abused and respect is thrown away. Some of Rick's former colleagues pitied him. Others shook their heads, saying he had brought it on himself. In the community, however, his dismissal was seen as just a sign that the days of unchecked arrogance were finally over. One warm evening, Marcus stood outside the police station, watching as children played tag on the sidewalk. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that hadn't always felt safe in this neighborhood. For years, parents had warned their kids to stay away from police officers. But now, little by little, those fears were fading. A boy, no more than 10, ran up to Marcus, tugging at his sleeve. His wide eyes shone with admiration. "Chief Johnson," the boy said breathlessly, "thank you for making us feel safe." Marcus bent down, meeting the child at eye level. A smile spread across his face, gentle but full of pride. "That's my job, son," he replied. "Everyone deserves respect. Always remember that." The boy grinned before darting back to his friends, laughter trailing behind him. Marcus straightened, watching the children play, his heart steady. Moments like this reminded him why he had taken this job, not for titles or authority, but for the people. Soon, the story of what had happened, the officer who spat on a man, only to discover that man was his new police chief, spread far beyond Brookville. It became a lesson shared in classrooms, churches, and community meetings. It wasn't just a tale of humiliation. It was a story of humility, justice, and the undeniable power of respect. Videos of the incident in Marcus's firm. The fair handling of the aftermath went viral online. Headlines praised the city's bold step toward accountability. People across the country debated the story, some in outrage, others in relief that change was possible, and through it all, Marcus Johnson remained steady. He never glorified himself, never sought to humiliate Rick further. Instead, he let the truth speak for itself. His mission was bigger than one man. It was about building a department and a community where dignity wasn't negotiable. Brookville wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still work to be done. But under Marcus's watch it was clear, the days of unchecked abuse of power were over, because in the end, the badge doesn't make you untouchable. Character does. And Chief Marcus Johnson had both.